Ethan Walker grabbed a stranger's wrist and pulled her out of the black water. And in that single moment, he had no idea he had just saved the most powerful woman in America. She wasn't breathing. He pressed his hands to her chest, breathed, counted again the way he'd learned 15 years ago, and prayed he'd never need. Then she coughed, gasped, opened her eyes and stared at him like he was a ghost. Neither of them knew they were already alone. No rescue, no signal, no way home. And she was about to ask him something that would change both their lives forever. What city are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. The morning it all began. Ethan Walker was already running late. He didn't mean to be. He never meant to be. But that was the thing about being a single father. The day never started when you wanted it to. It started the moment an 8-year-old girl padded down the hallway in mismatched socks and announced with complete authority that her backpack zipper was broken. Her lunch had the wrong kind of cheese. And also, Dad, did you remember it was picture day? He had not remembered it was picture day. Hold still, he said, crouching in front of Emma with a comb he'd found under the kitchen sink, trying to tame the same stubborn wave of brown hair she'd inherited from her mother. You look beautiful. You always say that. Because it's always true. Emma scrunched her nose, another thing she'd gotten from her mother, and held still for approximately 4 seconds before wiggling away. Mrs. Patterson says the boats are going out today, she said, grabbing her backpack off the hook by the door. She said there's weather coming. Mrs. Patterson watches too much Weather Channel. She said a big storm. Emma. I'm just saying what she said. Ethan straightened up, rolled his shoulders and looked at his daughter the way he always did in the mornings, like she was the only thing in the world he was absolutely sure about. Everything else in his life was uncertain. The rent was late. The truck needed new brake pads. His boss Dale had called the night before to say a last-minute job had come in, a big one, more money than Ethan usually saw in a week. But Emma was certain. Emma was the fixed point. Go to school, he said. I'll pick you up at 3. And if I'm 5 minutes late, you wait inside with Mrs. Patterson, not outside. Deal. Deal, Emma said. Then at the door, Dad. Yeah, bug. Come home. She said it the same way every morning. Not dramatically, not like a warning. Just a fact, the way kids state facts, like the sky being blue or dinner being at 6. Come home. It had started after her mother died. 3 years ago, Emma had been 5, and she had apparently decided that the only way to make sure the people she loved stayed was to ask them to. Every single morning, like a small ritual against a world she'd already learned could take things away without asking, Ethan always said the same thing back. Always. And then he got in his truck and drove to the harbor before the sun had fully cleared the water. The job that morning had come through Dale's contact at the luxury marina on the north end of town, the kind of marina where the boats cost more than most people's houses, where the dock hands wore matching polos and the owners paid for everything in cash or card without checking the price. Ethan had worked that marina twice before. He wasn't their first call. He was their emergency call, the guy you phoned when your regular technician was booked and your vessel needed to be seaworthy before noon. The vessel in question was called the Meridian. Ethan saw it from the parking lot and stopped walking for a moment. It wasn't just a yacht. It was, he struggled for the word, a statement. Sleek and white and enormous, the kind of ship that looked like it had been designed by someone who wanted you to understand immediately that the person who owned it existed in a different category of human than you did. 3 decks, satellite array on top. The kind of hull that said the owner had crossed real water, not just harbor. A man in a polo shirt met him at the dock, young, efficient, clipboard in hand. You're the technician? Ethan Walker. I got a call about a starboard engine issue. Primary propulsion coupling. The owner wants to depart by 10. He checked his watch. It was 7:43. Can you do it? Ethan had already started walking toward the gangway. I'll take a look. He spent the first hour below deck, which was where he was most comfortable, not because he liked small spaces, but because down in the mechanical belly of a ship, everything made sense. Things either worked or they didn't. Problems had causes. Causes had solutions. You didn't need money or connections or a college degree. You needed to know what you were looking at, and Ethan had been looking at marine engines since he was 16 years old, learning alongside his father in a garage that smelled like diesel and salt. The coupling was worn, but not catastrophically. He could get it serviceable. He'd strongly recommend replacement within 30 days, but if the vessel was staying in coastal waters, it would hold. He was halfway through the repair when he heard the heels on the deck above him. Sharp, fast, decisive. The footsteps of someone who moved like they were always already late for the next thing on their calendar. Then a voice low and clear and carrying the particular kind of authority that doesn't come from raising your voice but from never having had to, "Where is the technician?" Polo Shirt said something Ethan couldn't hear. "Tell him I need to speak with him." Ethan set down his wrench, wiped his hands on a rag, and climbed the ladder. She was standing on the aft deck with a phone in one hand and a tablet in the other, wearing clothes that cost more than his monthly rent, and looking at him with eyes that were the exact color of deep water, dark gray, slightly cold, and very, very focused. He'd seen her face before, not in person. On the cover of a magazine that had been sitting in Dale's waiting room. Forbes, maybe. Or Fortune. The headline had said something about her being one of the youngest women ever to take a company public at over $1 billion valuation. Her company did something with logistics software. He didn't fully understand it, but apparently it was the kind of thing that quietly ran enormous pieces of the global supply chain. And she had built it from nothing. Victoria Hayes. She looked at him the way people like her sometimes looked at people like him, not unkindly exactly, but with a particular efficiency, like she was calculating his usefulness inside of 3 seconds and filing the result. "Can you complete the repair before we depart?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. Maybe 90 minutes. I need 60. I can try." "I don't need you to try," she said. "I need you to tell me yes or no so I can plan accordingly." He held her gaze. Yes. She nodded once and turned back to her phone. Conversation over. He went back below deck. He made it in 55 minutes. The original plan. His plan was to finish the repair, hand off the paperwork to Polo Shirt, and be back in his truck by 9:30 with enough time to grab coffee and still make it to his second job across the harbor before noon. That was the plan. What happened instead was that Polo Shirt, whose name turned out to be Marcus, Victoria's personal assistant, found Ethan packing up his tools and said with the slightly desperate tone of someone who has been put in an impossible position by their employer, "Ms. Hayes wants to know if you'd be willing to come aboard for the voyage, just to the Henderson Point anchorage and back, 6 hours, in case the engine needs monitoring." "I'm not a crew member," Ethan said. "She's aware. She's prepared to compensate you at twice your current rate, for 6 hours. Ethan did the math. It was the kind of money that covered brake pads and half the rent in one afternoon. He thought about Emma. He thought about the weather report he'd half heard on the radio, driving in something about a system developing offshore, probably nothing, probably passing north. He thought about the way Emma had said come home that morning. He called Dale. Dale said, "Take the job, obviously." "Are you serious? That's double rate for 6 hours, take the job." He called the school and left a message with the front office. If he wasn't there by 3:15, Emma should wait with Mrs. Patterson. His neighbor 2 doors down had a spare key and his number. He stood at the gangway for one more moment, looking at the meridian, feeling something he couldn't name. Not quite reluctance, not quite premonition, but something between the two, like a note played just slightly off-key. Then he stepped aboard. The first 2 hours were fine. The engine ran clean. The water was calm enough. Ethan stayed mostly below or near the stern, monitoring the coupling and staying out of the way of the crew, 4 people total, plus Marcus, who all seemed to orbit Victoria Hayes like she was the center of a private solar system. He caught glimpses of her through the deck windows. On a call. Then another call. Pointing at something on a tablet while Marcus typed rapidly on a laptop. She didn't eat, didn't sit, moved from space to space like stillness was something that happened to other people. At one point, she walked past him on the stern deck and stopped. "Is it holding?" she asked. "So far, yes." "Good." She looked at the water for about half a second. "What's your name?" "Ethan. Ethan Walker." "How long have you done this?" "Marine repair, about 15 years. "You're good at it." "I'm very good at it," he said without defensiveness, just fact. She almost smiled. It didn't quite complete itself. "Good people usually are confident about it," she said and walked back inside. He watched her go and thought she must be exhausting to work for. Then around the third hour, the sky changed. Ethan had grown up on this coastline. He'd learned to read the sky the way his father had taught him, not just weather apps and radar, but the actual look of the air, the particular color that meant trouble, the way the wind shifted just before something serious arrived. His father used to say, "The ocean always tells you." Most people just don't speak the language. What the sky was saying right now at roughly 11:45 in the morning was something Ethan did not like. He found the captain a heavy-set man named Sorensen, who seemed competent and slightly overworked near the bridge. "That system, they said, was going north," Ethan said. "It didn't go north." Sorensen was already on the radio. His expression confirmed what Ethan had suspected. "How fast is it moving?" Ethan asked. "Fast. We need to turn back." "I know." Sorensen reached for the intercom to inform the owner. What happened next was something Ethan replayed many times afterward, looking for the moment when the situation became irreversible. Because there was a conversation, he could hear it through the bridge door. Sorensen's steady professional voice, and Victoria's voice lower and harder to make out, but unmistakably pushing back. And then a pause. And then Sorensen came back and said, his jaw tight, "We're going to try to outrun the northern edge of it." "That's a mistake," Ethan said. "I know, Captain." "I know Walker." He said it quietly without anger. He said it like a man who had just been overruled by the person signing his paycheck and was now performing a calculation of his own between his judgment and his livelihood. "Get below and make sure everything is secured." Ethan stood there for 2 more seconds. Then he went. The storm came in 40 minutes, not gradually, not with a warning period of gentle rain. It came the way serious storms sometimes came on open water, like a wall, like a decision, like something that had been waiting just out of sight and was done waiting. The meridian went from steady to violent inside of 6 minutes. Ethan had been below deck checking the coupling again when the first wave hit and threw him sideways into a steel housing unit. He caught himself on a rail, tasted blood from where he'd bitten his cheek, and climbed to his feet. The engine was screaming not from the coupling, but from something else, something external. The shaft, maybe the alignment knocked off by the sudden severity of the sea. He got on the intercom. "Captain, engine's compromised. You need to know." Static. Then, "We have bigger problems." He went up. The deck was chaos in the truest sense. Not the movie version of chaos where everything is dramatic and clearly framed, but the real version where everything was too loud and too fast, and the footing was wrong, and the rain was coming sideways, and it was genuinely difficult to tell which direction was important. Ethan saw Marcus on his knees gripping a rail. He saw one of the crew members trying to release something near the bow. He didn't see Victoria. "Where is she?" he shouted at Marcus over the wind. Marcus pointed. "Up, the observation deck, of course." She'd gone up to the top deck because she'd been on a call. This was what she told him later, much later on the island, when they had time to reconstruct the sequence of events. The call was with her legal team in New York. It was about the acquisition. She had gone to the observation deck for privacy and reception, and she had been so deep in the conversation that she hadn't fully processed how fast the weather had arrived. By the time she registered the severity, the stairs below her were flooded with rushing water from a wave that had taken out one of the deck barriers, and she was effectively cut off. Ethan didn't know any of this yet. He only knew she wasn't where she was supposed to be. He climbed. The ladder to the observation deck was on the starboard exterior. In good conditions, it was a 30-second climb. In what was happening right now, with the ship rolling 15 degrees and spray hitting him like gravel, it was something else entirely. He gripped each rung and did not look down, and told himself the same thing he told Emma when she was scared, one thing at a time. Just the next thing. He made the top. Victoria was there, pressed against the far railing, phone still in hand, and her expression for just a moment before she replaced it with control was the most honest thing he'd seen on her face all day. Pure, unadulterated fear. "We need to get down," he said. "The stairs are flooded." "I know. We're going over the side railing to the exterior ladder. I'll go first, you follow. Put your hands exactly where I put mine. That's..." She looked at the ladder, at the sea below it, at the ship moving under them. "That is not safe." "No," he said. "It's not. But it's safer than staying here. Are you ready?" She stared at him. He could see her calculating the things she did, the cost-benefit analysis, happening somewhere behind her eyes at speed. She was probably the kind of person who had never been in a situation she couldn't think her way out of. This was that situation. "Yes," she said. They made it to the rail. He went first, got onto the ladder, held himself steady against the pitch and roll, and looked up at her. "Right hand on the right stanchion," he said. "Left hand here. Don't look at the water." "I wasn't going to look at the water." "People always look at the water." "I'm not people." Something almost like a grim laugh. "Okay, move." She was halfway down when the ship lurched a massive wrong movement. Not the normal roll, but something structural, something giving way below. The deck groaned in a way that Ethan's 15 years of marine experience told him was deeply, seriously bad. The sound of something catastrophic beginning. The explosion, when it came, wasn't the movie kind either. It wasn't a fireball. It was a deep concussive crack from below the waterline, probably the fuel system, probably a combination of the storm damage and whatever structural compromise had already existed, followed by a violent shuddering that went through the entire vessel. The ladder shook. Victoria lost her grip. He caught her wrist. He didn't think about it. His hand just closed around her wrist, the way hands close around things when the body has already decided before the mind has caught up. His other arm was looped through the ladder. His shoulders screamed with the strain of two people's weight. She was looking up at him. Her face was completely white. "I have you," he said. Below them, the water was dark and churning. The ship was listing now, tilting hard. Things were sliding. The crew was shouting somewhere. "You need to let go of the ladder," he said, "and get a hold of the railing beside you. Reach left. Do you see it?" Her free hand found it. "Good. Now." Another lurch. This one final. The Meridian made a sound that was almost human, a long, agonized groan, and then the stern began to go under. "Swim toward me," Ethan said. "The moment we're in the water, swim toward me." "I can't." "Victoria." It was the first time he'd used her name. Something in her eyes focused. "Swim toward me." They went into the water together. The ocean was cold in the way that matters not uncomfortable, but physiologically serious. The kind of cold that makes your lungs forget how to expand. Ethan had been in cold water before. He knew the first 30 seconds were the dangerous ones. The seconds when your body wanted to gasp and panic, and your job was to override it, to hold to find the surface and start moving. He found the surface. He looked for her. She was 6 feet away, not swimming, treading water. But barely. There was something wrong with her right arm, possibly hit during the fall, and her face had that particular blankness that precedes going under. He got to her in 5 strokes. "I've got you," he said. "Float on your back. Let me work." "I can swim," she said, but her voice was thin. "I know you can. Let me work anyway." He got his arm across her chest, underneath her arms, the rescue carry he'd learned in his teens, and never fully forgotten, and he swam. He didn't know what he was swimming toward. The ship was going down behind him. He could feel the suction of it starting the way the water moved when something large displaced it, and he swam away from that pull, away and forward, and he didn't look back. He swam until the suction stopped. He swam until his arms had stopped hurting and moved into the place beyond hurt. He swam until something solid met his feet, not a ship, not debris, but ground. Sandy and actual. He stood knees shaking and pulled Victoria with him until she was out of the water, until she was on her knees on a beach he couldn't yet see in the dark and the rain. And she was coughing, and then she was breathing, and then she was looking at him. She wasn't breathing right. He checked her, pressed, counted, breathed. She gasped, coughed, opened her eyes, and stared at him. The rain was starting to ease. Somewhere behind the clouds, there was the idea of dawn, just the first cold suggestion of it, not yet visible, but present. Ethan Walker was on his knees, on an unknown piece of ground in the middle of the ocean. His shoulder was damaged in ways he wouldn't fully assess. Until later, he had no phone, no tools, no idea where he was. And his daughter was going to wake up in a few hours expecting him to be home. The most powerful woman in America was alive next to him. And she said in a voice stripped of everything except raw, unguarded honesty, "Why did you come back for me?" He looked at her, at the water behind them, at the sky beginning its slow shift toward morning. "Because you were still up there," he said. She was quiet for a long moment, then very quietly, "No one has ever done that for me." It was the most unguarded sentence she would speak to him for a long time, and it landed in the space between them like something that couldn't be taken back. He didn't respond. There wasn't anything to say to that, not yet, not here. He just started looking at what they had, what they didn't have, what he needed to figure out before the sun came fully up and the reality of their situation became impossible to avoid. They were alive. That was the thing he kept coming back to. They were alive, and the shore was under their feet, and he had made Emma a promise he intended to keep no matter what it took. Come home. Always. He just didn't know yet how long it would take. The sun came up slowly, the way it always does when you don't want it to. Ethan had not slept. He didn't think Victoria had either, though at some point in the last hour before dawn, she had stopped shaking, which he took as a reasonable substitute for rest. They had moved back from the waterline. He'd insisted she hadn't argued, which told him more about her current state than anything she'd said, and found a place where the ground was drier and the wind came at them from one direction instead of all of them at once. Now it was morning. Full, unambiguous morning, and the things that the darkness had allowed them to postpone were no longer postponable. Ethan assessed silently and methodically the way he'd been trained to assess mechanical problems. What do you have? What do you not have? What is the actual priority versus the emotional priority? Because those two things are rarely the same. What he had: the clothes on his back, a waterproof work watch that was still running his belt, and the piece of instinct and experience his father had spent years installing in him. What he did not have: phone tools, water, food, any idea of their exact location, or any certainty that rescue was coming. What was the actual priority? Fresh water. Everything else, where they were, what happened to the ship who might be looking for them, was secondary to the fact that the human body starts breaking down without water in ways that become irreversible faster than most people understand. He had maybe 48 hours before it mattered urgently. He wanted to solve it in the next few. Victoria was watching him. She'd been watching him for the last several minutes with the same focused attention she'd aimed at her tablet on the boat, like she was studying him for information, reading him for data. "You've been doing that since dawn," she said. The quiet, calculating thing. "It's not a thing," he said. "It's just thinking. Most people think out loud when they're scared." "I'm not scared." "No," she said, and her voice held something that was almost respect, not quite. "You're not." He looked at her. Her right arm was favoring. She was keeping it close to her body, which meant whatever had happened during the fall was more than a bruise. "How bad is the arm?" "Functional." "That's not what I asked." She met his eyes. "It hurts. It's not broken. I can use it." "Don't use it unless you need to. I'll decide what I—" She stopped herself. Actually, stopped herself mid-sentence, which he suspected was something she rarely did. She looked away, looked back. "Thank you," she said, "for last night. I should have said that first." He nodded once. Didn't make it a bigger moment than it needed to be. "We need water," he said. "Everything else after." Agreed. "Can you walk?" She stood up. Didn't wince, but her jaw tightened. "Yes." "Then let's find out what we're working with." They started moving. The island, because it was clearly an island they'd already established, that the water visible in every direction they'd tested was not large. Ethan estimated, based on the hour of walking they did in the first morning, that it was probably 1.5 miles in its longest direction, maybe 3/4 of a mile wide at the broadest point. There were trees, which mattered because trees meant the possibility of coconuts, which meant both fluid and calories. There was a freshwater situation he suspected might exist near the interior. He was listening for the specific kind of bird noise that often indicated a water source, and there was the wreckage. The wreckage was the hardest part of the morning. It had begun washing in while they walked, not the ship itself, but the pieces of it. Debris. Things that had been inside the Meridian 12 hours ago and were now scattered across the waterline. Cushions. A section of cabin wall. A life preserver which Ethan picked up immediately and set aside. A waterproof container. He opened it and found a first aid kit in reasonable condition, and something moved in his chest when he saw it. Something that felt like a door opening that he hadn't realized had been closed. Victoria was quieter when the debris appeared. He didn't draw attention to it. He just kept moving, kept collecting what was useful, kept taking stock. But he was aware of her walking slightly slower, aware of her eyes on the water, and he understood without her saying it because she wouldn't say it. Not yet, that she was looking for people, looking for signs of the crew, of Marcus. He was doing the same thing. "The life raft would have deployed automatically," he said, not looking at her, keeping his voice matter of fact. "Standard protocol on a vessel that size. Sorensen knew what he was doing. He would have gotten people into it." A pause. "You believe that?" "Yes," he said. And he did believe it. That wasn't the same thing as being certain. She was quiet for another minute. Then, "Marcus has a daughter. She's 4. Ethan didn't say anything. "I've been working with him for 6 years, she said. "He knows exactly how I like my coffee, which is not a small thing because I'm very specific about it, and he can read my mood before I walk into a room. He is—" She stopped. He heard the breath. She took the controlled exhale. "He's one of the best people I know." "The raft deployed," Ethan said. "I believe that." She nodded, didn't say anything more, but he noticed she walked a little closer to him after that, not close enough to call it anything, but the distance between them had shifted by about a foot, and Ethan, who had spent years reading the small body language signals of a child he was trying not to alarm, noticed it. They found water in the interior exactly where he'd suspected, a small freshwater stream cutting through the higher ground, probably fed by rain collection through the vegetation. He put his hand in it, tasted it, carefully assessed. It was not perfectly clean. It was adequate. He knew how to make it more adequate using methods he'd need to explain because he'd need her help. He turned around to find her already crouched beside the stream, looking at it with the expression of a person who was recalibrating. "You can't just drink it," he said. "I know that." "You didn't look like you knew it." "I know a lot of things," she said with a flash of the voice from the boat, the voice that ran a billion-dollar company and was not accustomed to being spoken to like she needed instruction. "I was just looking." "At what?" She looked up at him. "Thinking about how completely wrong I was about what mattered today." He didn't push on that. He could see it was costing her something, that admission, even that small one. "We're going to boil it," he said. "I need you to help me build a fire." "I've never built a fire." "I know." "How do you know?" He almost smiled. Almost. "You held kindling like it owed you money." She looked down at the sticks she'd automatically picked up from the ground when he'd started gathering. Her grip, he had to admit, was exactly that, the grip of someone who had never needed to produce fire through friction in their entire life. She loosened her hold, just slightly, which was not the same as letting go. He'd noticed that about her already. "Show me," she said. And that was the first real thing, the first moment Ethan would point to later when he tried to explain what happened between them. Not the rescue, not the night on the beach, but this Victoria Hayes, one of the most powerful executives in the country, crouching in the interior of an unknown island with sticks in her hands saying, "Show me," and meaning it without performance or strategy. He showed her. HUD. Day 1 passed in the way that survival days pass, not quickly, not slowly, but with a kind of terrible density, each hour containing approximately the weight of a normal week. They got the fire going. They boiled water using a piece of ship metal they'd found and bent into a rough vessel shape. They drank. They found coconuts. They inventoried the first aid kit and established that Victoria's arm was bruised to the bone, but intact, and that Ethan's shoulder, he'd been pushing through it all morning, had taken enough damage that he needed to tape it before it became a real problem. She taped it, without being asked, without making a production of it. She just saw him struggling with the wrap, sat down in front of him, and took it out of his hands. "Leftover right," he said. "I can figure out medical tape," she said. "Okay. Stop directing everything. Stop doing it wrong." A long pause. Then, leftover right. Leftover right. Her hands were precise. That was the thing he noticed, her hands were very precise. The kind of precision that came from years of a particular kind of focused work. The tape went on clean and firm, and when she was done, she pressed the edge down and sat back without asking for acknowledgement. "You grew up doing things like this?" she asked. "Not exactly like this," he said. "My dad taught me how to handle emergencies. He believed in being prepared. He used to say, you should always know how to do the basic things, because the world will take away your tools, but it can't take away your knowledge." Sounds like a good man? He was. She heard the tense. Her eyes moved to him briefly. "I'm sorry." "He had a good run," Ethan said. "He died knowing his kid turned out okay. That's not a bad deal." She looked at her hands. "My father is still alive," she said. "We don't speak." He didn't push. He'd learned from Emma, from years of learning how to be with Emma after her mother died, that some sentences were not invitations to probe. They were just sentences someone needed to say out loud to make them real. She said it. It was real. He let it be. Around midday they had a fire going that they were maintaining carefully. A water supply that was workable, the first aid kit, and the rough beginning of what could generously be called a shelter. A piece of debris leaned against a natural rock formation, angled to deflect wind and rain. It was not comfortable. It was functional. They sat near the fire and ate coconut and didn't talk for a while, and it was not an uncomfortable silence. That surprised Ethan. He would have expected, given what he knew about her, about the kind of person she apparently was, that silence would be something she filled, that stillness would make her restless. But she sat with the fire and ate, and was quiet in a way that felt practiced, like something she'd taught herself a long time ago. "What's your daughter's name?" she asked. He looked at her. "Emma." "How old?" 8. Almost 9. He paused. "She's going to be worried. She'll know you didn't just—" Victoria stopped, started again. "When the story gets out about the ship, they'll start search and rescue. She'll know you were on the ship. She'll know people are looking. That's the thing," Ethan said. "She knows what happened to her mother. She knows people leave and don't come back. And I told her this morning." He stopped. The feeling that moved through him at that moment was not one he was going to perform in front of this woman. He kept his voice level. "I told her I'd pick her up at 3. Silence. "She's with Mrs. Patterson," he said. "A neighbor. Good woman. Emma will be safe. That's not, I know she's safe. It's not about safe." He looked at the fire. "It's about the look on her face when she realized I wasn't coming, and thinking about how long that look lasts before she decides this is permanent." Victoria Hayes was not a woman who cried easily. He had already established that through observation and inference. She was a woman who controlled her emotional responses the way she controlled quarterly earnings, deliberately, strategically, with awareness of audience. But something about what he'd just said moved across her face in a way she didn't fully catch in time. "She won't decide it's permanent," she said. "Kids are more resilient than—" "Don't," he said gently. She stopped. "Don't tell me about kids," he said. "Not this particular thing. You don't know Emma." A beat. Then, "You're right. I'm sorry." He nodded. They went back to the fire. After a moment, very quietly, she said, "My mother left when I was 6. She didn't die. She just left. And for about 2 years I would wait for her to come back every single afternoon. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the fire, or past it. I know what that feels like. The waiting." He didn't say anything. "Emma is waiting," she said. "That's real and it's painful and I won't minimize it. But she's going to keep waiting because you're going to come back." It was the first time she'd said anything like that. Not "we'll be rescued," not "there will be a search," but "you're going to come back." Like it was a fact she'd already decided on. Like she'd put it on her calendar. Something in him steadied at that. Not completely, but enough. By the end of day 2, they had a working routine. That was the thing nobody told you about survival. How quickly the human brain moved toward pattern and routine. Because routine was how the brain convinced itself that chaos was manageable. You did the same things in the same order, and your nervous system started very slowly to believe you were okay. Morning water, fire maintenance, coconuts and whatever fruit they'd found the previous afternoon. Assessment of the water line for useful debris. Then the main tasks of the day, improving shelter gathering signaling. The signaling was Ethan's fixed priority. He'd built a signal fire on the highest point he could access a rocky outcrop on the island's northern side, and every morning they carried enough material up to keep it going for several hours if they needed to. The smoke in the right conditions was visible from a significant distance. Whether anyone was looking in the right direction was a different question. Victoria had taken the signal fire personally. She spent an afternoon rearranging the reflective debris pieces into an actual pattern, the kind of systematic, geometrically coherent pattern that he would not have thought to create. 50 meters across. Readable from the air. "That's good?" he said. "I know it's good." Then, after a second, "Thank you." He was learning to read her. The thank yous were real, she wasn't performatively gracious, which made the genuine moments stand out. The control was not coldness exactly. It was armor, and like all armor, it had gaps, and the gaps appeared at specific angles, under specific pressures, and vanished again quickly. She was learning to read him too. He caught her watching him not the way she'd watched him the first morning assessing his usefulness, but differently. Watching the way he moved, the way he thought through problems, the way he talked about Emma. "You do that thing," she said on the evening of day 2, while they sat near the fire eating the last of the coconut from that morning's climb. "What thing?" "When you mention her, Emma, your whole face changes. That's called caring about someone." "I know what it's called," she said, and there was something in her voice that wasn't sarcasm, something more like wistfulness. "I'm just not used to seeing it that openly." "How else would it look?" She was quiet for a moment. "In my experience," she said, "people care about things in private and perform not caring in public. Because caring about something is leverage. It's a weakness someone can use against you." He looked at her across the fire. "Who taught you that?" She met his eyes. "Everyone," she said. And then, like she'd surprised herself, "My father specifically." He waited. "He wasn't cruel," she said. "He had a theory. That attachment was a strategic liability. That if you let people see what you cared about, they'd use it to control you. He had evidence for this theory. He'd been burned. He taught me his conclusions." She paused. "I became very successful applying them. And I'm sitting on an island that no one knows about," she said with a dry precision that wasn't quite humor, but was adjacent to it. "Wondering who I would have called if I'd had a phone." He let that land. "Who would you have called?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately. The fire moved between them. Somewhere above the stars were doing what they always did, being massive and indifferent and beautiful in ways that didn't care about any of it. "Marcus," she said finally, "and my attorney, and possibly my CFO." A pause. "In that order. No one personal." "Marcus is personal. You know what I mean." She did know. He could see she knew by the way she didn't defend the statement further, just let it sit with the discomfort of a true thing. "No," she said. "No one personal." He thought about who he would have called, who he would still call the moment he had any way to reach the outside world. Emma's school. Mrs. Patterson. Dale. Emma. 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 "I'm sorry," he said. She looked at him sharply. "Don't pity me." "I'm not pitying you. I'm sorry, that's true." He met her eyes. "There's a difference." Another silence. Then unexpectedly she laughed, just a small thing, a quick exhale that became a sound. The first time he'd heard her laugh. It was lower than he'd expected. More real. "You're very strange," she said. "I get that a lot." "I doubt that. Mostly from my daughter." This time, the laugh was longer. Day 3 brought the first real crisis between them, and it came as most real crises do from something small. They had established, without formally discussing it, a division of physical tasks. Ethan handled the structural and mechanical demands, shelter maintenance, fire construction, the heavier lifting. Victoria handled organization planning and the pattern-based work that her mind did naturally. It was practical. It was efficient. It was the unconscious result of two people figuring out how to exist in proximity under pressure. What it was not, and what Victoria eventually made very clear, was acceptable as a permanent arrangement. "I want to do the water run," she said on the morning of day 3. "Your arm is fine. I need to check it again before—" "Ethan." She said his name the same way she'd said everything on the boat that first morning, with the particular sharpness of a woman who had built her entire life on not being managed. "I carried that container up the hill yesterday without your assistance. My arm is functional. I am going to do the water run." He looked at her. "Okay." She blinked. "Okay. Did you want me to argue more?" She recalibrated. "No." "Then okay," he said. "Take the long route past the northern water line, see if anything new came in from the wreck." She took the route. She came back 40 minutes later with the container full. 2 additional pieces of useful debris and an expression that he couldn't entirely read. "There was a bag," she said when she'd set things down. "Personal bag, from the crew quarters." He looked at her. "It was Marcus's," she said. "I recognized it. He has a patch on the strap. His daughter put it there." The air changed slightly. "It doesn't mean—" she started. "I know." "A bag in the water doesn't mean anything definitive." "I know." He said it steadily. Because he did know. And because she needed him to know it to say it without flinching, so she didn't have to flinch either. She sat down. She pressed her hands together in her lap, interlaced them, released them. "He would have let her put the patch on the bag," she said quietly. "He would have let her think he liked it, even if he thought it was slightly embarrassing, because that's the kind of father he is." She looked at the ground. Is, Ethan said. She looked up at him. "You believe that?" "Yes." "How are you so certain about things?" "I'm not," he said. "I just decide what I'm going to believe, and then I believe it until I'm proven wrong. It's more useful than the alternative." She stared at him for a long moment. "I have run a company of 4,000 people," she said, "for 11 years. I have hired and fired executives. I have closed deals that took 2 years to negotiate. I have sat across the table from people who thought they could intimidate me." She paused. "And I cannot figure you out. There's nothing to figure out." "That's exactly what I can't figure out." He almost smiled at that. He picked up the debris she'd brought back and started examining it. She watched him. Ethan. Yeah. Why are you doing this? He looked up. Doing what? All of it. The fire, the water, the shelter. She gestured vaguely at the general situation. You could sit down. You could panic. You could be angry. Most people would be at least one of those things by now. He set the debris down, thought about the answer because she deserved the real one. I have a daughter who wakes up every morning and says, "Come home," because she's already lost one parent and she's trying to make sure she doesn't lose another. He looked at her steadily. I made her a promise. I intend to keep it. Everything I do here is in the service of that. There's no mystery. Victoria Hayes looked at him for a very long time, and then something happened that he had not expected that he would think about for a long time afterward, turning it over in his mind, the way you turn over a thing that doesn't yet make sense. Her eyes filled. Just the edge of it. Just the beginning. She didn't cry. She controlled it the way she controlled everything applied the internal force that she'd spent decades developing. But he saw it, the split second before the wall went up, and she knew he'd seen it. She didn't look away. She held his gaze, which he understood was itself an act of extraordinary courage, from a woman for whom being seen was the thing she'd spent her life preventing. She's lucky, Victoria said. Emma. To have someone who... She stopped. Finished the sentence differently than she'd started it. To have you. He didn't know what to say to that. He said the only thing that was true. I'm the lucky one. Day 5 was when Victoria found the emergency beacon. They'd been working their way through the remaining debris, systematically sorting it into categories: useful, potentially useful salvage for material, and she'd been on the eastern waterline when she called his name. Not the controlled professional version of his name. The version without management in it. He got there in under 2 minutes. She was holding a small orange device, roughly the size and shape of a thick paperback book, scuffed and wet but intact. An EPIRB, Emergency Position Indicating Radio Beacon. The kind of device that when activated sent a signal to satellites that was then relayed to the Coast Guard. She was looking at it like it might not be real. Is it? She started. He took it, turned it over, examined the housing, checked the battery indicator. It was a self-contained battery, and the housing had been waterproof. He pressed the indicator. A small light appeared. Green. A green light on an EPIRB was the particular color of every door opening at once. He looked at her. She had one hand pressed flat over her mouth, both eyes wide. All the control, all the management, all the armor suspended for about 4 seconds, while she was just a person holding something that could mean going home. It works, he said. Activate it, she said. Ethan, activate it. There were things to consider. Battery life. The fact that activation would start a timer, they couldn't stop the question of whether this was their one shot and they needed to time it correctly. All of that was real. All of that mattered. He looked at her face. He activated it. The light shifted from green to a slow, steady pulse. The signal was going. Right now, in this moment, a satellite somewhere above the Pacific was receiving a location. They both stared at it for what was probably 30 seconds of silence. Now we wait, he said. I hate waiting, she said. I know. How do you know that? Because you hate everything you can't control. A pause. That's very accurate. Another pause. And annoying. Which part? Both. He set the beacon on the highest piece of flat stone he could find, in the most unobstructed position relative to the sky. They stepped back from it. They looked at it. The small pulse of light, regular and patient, talking to the sky. Victoria Hayes stood beside him close enough that he could feel the warmth of her, because even in survival conditions in wet clothes on an island in the middle of nowhere, the human body generated heat and proximity. Mattered in ways that had nothing to do with anything except the simple physical fact of not being alone. Ethan, she said. Yeah. When we get back, she stopped. If, When? He said. She absorbed that. When we get back. I want Emma to meet me. He looked at her. I have something to say to her, Victoria said. From me. Not as a CEO or as someone who could do things for her financially. I don't mean that. She struggled slightly with the sentence, which was unusual because she was not a woman who struggled with sentences. I want to tell her something about her father, that she should know, about what he's like. He didn't respond for a moment. What does she like? Victoria asked. Emma. What does she? Books, he said. She likes books, and she likes the ocean, and she likes peanut butter pancakes. Peanut butter pancakes. Don't knock it until you've tried it. I would very much like to try it, she said. And it wasn't small talk. She meant every word of it, which was something he was still getting used to from a woman who had presented herself initially as someone who said exactly what was necessary and nothing more. He looked at the beacon, the steady pulse, the signal going to the sky. Victoria, he said. Yes. Why'd you overrule the captain? The question landed. He felt her go slightly still beside him. He'd been waiting to ask it. Not to accuse they were past the version of this conversation that was about blame, but because he genuinely needed to know. Because the answer said something about her that he hadn't fully sorted yet. The acquisition, she said. If I missed the window, if I was not available for the closing call, the entire deal could fall through. 18 months of work. $300 million in potential value. And... She was quiet. And it's more than that, he said. Isn't it? She exhaled. I have spent 11 years, she said, making sure that no situation could exist in which I was not in control of an outcome. I have built systems and processes and redundancies specifically so that the answer to any problem was always me. She paused. The storm was a problem. The answer was supposed to be me. I made the wrong call. You made the wrong call, he said. Yes, and you know it. I've known it since before we hit the water, he nodded. That was the thing he'd been looking for. Not the apology, not the performance of regret, but the actual reckoning that happens when a person smart enough to know they were wrong faces the fact of having been wrong anyway. It was a particular kind of courage, that facing. Okay, he said. That's it. Okay. You know it. I know you know it. The question now is what we do with it. He looked at the beacon, which is what it's always been. She was quiet for a moment. Then, you forgive very easily. I don't, he said. I just don't waste time on things that don't change the situation. She considered that. That's a very useful way to live. I've found it helps. They stood together in the afternoon light, watching the beacon pulse its patient signal into the sky, and Ethan Walker thought about Emma, who was somewhere on the other side of the ocean waiting for a father who had promised to come home. He thought about the green light on the EPIRB and what it meant and whether help was already moving toward them. He thought about the look on Victoria Hayes' face in the moment the beacon activated and how completely, absolutely human it had been, stripped of everything that money and power and strategy had built up around her, just a person wanting to go home. He understood that. He understood it completely. He was going home. He had decided that on the first night on the beach with her breathing next to him, and nothing that had happened in the days since had changed it. But something else had also happened somewhere in the middle of the water runs, and the fire maintenance, and the conversations by the light of something they'd built themselves from nothing. Something he hadn't planned and didn't have a category for. He had come to know this woman. Not Victoria Hayes, the billionaire. Not the CEO with the Forbes cover and the billion-dollar acquisition and the voice that cut through rooms. The other one. The one who held kindling like it owed her money and pressed her hands together in her lap when she was holding something difficult and said, "Show me," like she meant it. And the thing about knowing someone, the real them, not the version they showed the world, was that it changed the landscape. It changed what was possible. It changed the shape of things. He wasn't sure yet what shape this was becoming. He just knew it was becoming something. And the beacon was pulsing, and the sky was listening, and somewhere the world was still turning with Emma in it, and Mrs. Patterson, and the unfinished business of the rest of his life. And right now, in this moment on this island, the green light was on. That was enough. That had to be enough. For now. The beacon had been pulsing for 36 hours when Victoria woke up and couldn't move. Not couldn't move like paralyzed. Couldn't move like the specific humiliating way the body sometimes announces that it has been pushed past a threshold and is now collecting payment. She sat up from the shelter they'd built, the debris and rock formation that had become, against all reasonable expectation, something close to a home, and the world tilted sideways in a way that had nothing to do with the island. She pressed her hand to the ground. Waited. The tilting didn't stop. Ethan was already awake. He was almost always already awake when she surfaced in the mornings, which she'd come to understand was not insomnia, but habit. The particular alertness of a man who had spent 3 years as the only adult in a household whose nervous system had recalibrated itself around the responsibility of being the last line of defense. He looked at her. She watched his expression shift from neutral to focused in about half a second. "Don't," she said. "You're pale." "I'm always pale." "You're a different kind of pale." He crossed the space between them and crouched in front of her, which she found simultaneously practical and aggravating. He pressed the back of his hand to her forehead. "You have a fever." "I'm fine." "Victoria." "I said I'm fine. And I said you have a fever." He sat back on his heels and looked at her with the steady, unmoved expression she'd come to associate with the version of him that wasn't going to argue, but also was absolutely not going to concede. "How long have you felt like this?" She thought about lying. She genuinely considered it the way she would have considered a bad offer in a negotiation, weighed it, calculated the upside, assessed the risk. The problem was that she'd been lying to herself about this for roughly 18 hours, and the math was no longer working. "Yesterday afternoon," she said. "Around the water run." "Why didn't you?" "Because it wasn't useful information yesterday," she said. "And because you would have made me stop working, and we had 3 hours of signal fire materials left to collect, and I wasn't going to be the reason we missed a rescue window." He stared at her. "Don't look at me like that," she said. "I'm not looking at you like anything. You're looking at me like I did something irrational." "I'm looking at you," he said very carefully, "like you just told me you've been sick since yesterday and didn't say anything, and I'm trying to decide if I'm worried or angry." "Which is it?" "Worried," he said. "Mostly worried." He stood up. "Lie back down." "Ethan." "Lie back down. I need to look at your arm." The arm. She'd been favoring it less in the last 2 days, which she'd taken as improvement. Ethan took the bandage off and looked at it with the careful, unhurried attention he brought to everything mechanical, and what she saw on his face while he looked was the thing she'd been avoiding looking at herself for the last day and a half. "There's an infection starting," he said. "Starting," she said. "Not advanced. Starting means we treat it now before it becomes advanced." He met her eyes. "We have antiseptic in the kit. Limited, but we have it. I'm going to clean this, redress it, and you're going to rest today. The signal fire. I'll handle the signal fire. You can't do everything. Today I can." He said it flatly without leaving room for the negotiation she was already formulating. "Victoria, you are sick. You are injured. You are on a deserted island with no medical facilities, and a beacon that may or may not have been received by anyone who can act on it yet." He looked at her steadily. "You are going to let me help you. Today. Just today." She looked at him. He held her gaze without flinching, which very few people in her professional life had ever been able to do. "Just today," she said. "Just today." She lay back down. He worked on her arm, with the methodical care of someone who understood that the cost of doing this wrong was higher than they could afford. She watched the concentration on his face, and thought not for the first time about how completely she'd misjudged him in those first few minutes on the boat. She'd filed him away in a category competent, useful, temporary, the way she'd filed away most people who existed in her life as a function, rather than a presence. She'd been wrong about what he was. She'd been wrong in the specific way that people are wrong when they've spent so long processing other humans as resources that they've forgotten that resources aren't what humans are. "You're doing it again," he said without looking up from her arm. "What thing?" "The face you make when you're regretting something." "I don't have a face for that." "You have about 11 faces you don't know you have." She blinked. "Name one other one." "The face you make when you're about to argue but you've already realized the other person is right." She opened her mouth, closed it. "That's annoyingly accurate. You also do this thing with your left hand when you're thinking through a problem. You tap the middle 3 fingers in order like you're playing a scale." She looked at her left hand. She hadn't been aware of doing it. She was doing it right now. 11 years, she said. "I've had assistants for 11 years who presumably saw me every day, and no one has ever told me that." "Maybe they thought it would be useful leverage," he said with a dry tone that was becoming one of her favorite things about him. "In case they ever needed it." She actually laughed at that. It moved through the fever heat and the dull ache in her arm, and it was real, and the realness of it surprised her the way real things had been surprising her since she'd woken up on this island. He finished with her arm, sat back, looked at her with the assessment expression. "Better," he said. "We caught it in time. I know I should have told you sooner." "You should have," he said, and then not making a bigger deal of it than it was, "Drink something." She drank. He built up the fire. The morning moved around them. She was thinking about something. Had been thinking about it actually since day 4, since a specific memory had surfaced during what she'd come to privately call the inventory hours, the long stretches when there was no task immediately pressing, and the mind deprived of its usual inputs went hunting through its own files. She'd been trying to decide if it mattered, trying to decide if it was relevant, or if it was the kind of thing the feverish island-stripped version of her brain was inflating past its actual significance. She'd decided this morning that it mattered, that she needed to say it out loud to someone who could think clearly, and Ethan was the only someone available. "I need to tell you something," she said. He was adding wood to the fire. He didn't stop moving. "Okay. About the ship. About what might have happened." Now he stopped. He turned and looked at her. And she recognized in the quality of his attention that he was going to listen the way he did everything completely without performing it. She took a breath, and she told him. 3 weeks before the voyage, Victoria's internal audit team had flagged an anomaly. That was the word they'd used. Anomaly, which was the corporate equivalent of saying something is wrong, and we're not sure how wrong. The anomaly was in the acquisition financials. Numbers that had been submitted to her for review did not match numbers her team was pulling independently from the underlying accounts. The discrepancy was not enormous in the absolute sense, a few $1 million across a complex, multi-layered transaction, but in context, in the specific places where it appeared, it was the kind of thing that indicated not error, but intention. Someone had been adjusting numbers. Someone inside the deal. She'd kept it quiet while she investigated. That was her instinct, and her training. You don't announce that you found a leak until you know where the water is coming from. Because the moment you announce it, the person responsible has time to disappear the evidence. She'd told no one except her personal attorney and one member of her audit team. The voyage on the Meridian. The voyage that was supposed to take her to the Henderson Point anchorage for a face-to-face meeting with the acquisition target's CEO was the scheduled moment at which she intended to confront what she'd found. She had the evidence. She had the documentation. She had a plan. What she had not had, apparently, was the understanding that someone already knew she was coming. "You think it wasn't an accident?" Ethan said. "I think," she said carefully, "that the engine failure was unusual. I think the coupling issue, the one you came aboard to repair, might have been created, not developed naturally. And I think the timing of the storm relative to where we were when the ship went down." She paused. "I don't believe in coincidences at that scale." Ethan was very still. "You're saying someone tried to kill you?" I'm saying someone had reason to make me disappear, she said, before I could get to that meeting, before I could present what I'd found. She met his eyes. Which means that right now, whoever did this believes they've succeeded. They believe I'm gone, and everything I knew, every piece of evidence I had went down with the ship. The word "except" was in the air between them before she said it. Except your memory, he said. Except my memory, she agreed. I know what I found. I know where it is. I know who had access to it. She paused. And when I get back, I'm going to take apart every person who was in a position to do this, and I'm going to find the one who did. He was quiet for a moment. She watched him process it, not frantically, not with the alarm performance that most people would have produced upon hearing someone tried to murder my boss, and were stranded on the evidence trail, but with the same internal steadiness that was starting to feel to her less like a character trait and more like a form of structural integrity. Who knew about the voyage plan? He said. My executive team, my legal team, Marcus, the crew. She paused. And the acquisition targets people. And who had reason to want the deal to fall through? She was quiet for a moment, not because she didn't know the answer, because saying the answer out loud made it real in a way that its existing as a suspicion had not. My CFO, she said. Daniel Rourke. She said the name like it tasted wrong. He's been with the company for 7 years. He was my first major hire after we went public. He has access to every financial system, every deal structure, every account. She looked at the fire. He's also been in conversations, indirect conversations, ones I wasn't supposed to know about, with a competitor who would benefit significantly from this acquisition falling through and from my company being destabilized. How do you know about the conversations? Because I built the company, she said simply. And I pay attention to things I'm not supposed to be paying attention to. It's how I've survived this long. Ethan was quiet. If you're right, he said, then the moment you surface, he'll know you survived. He'll know you know. Yes. And he'll have had how long to cover his tracks? Yes. Victoria. He waited until she looked at him. Do you understand what that means for the moment we get off this island? Yes, she said, for the 3rd time. And this time she held his gaze and let him see the full shape of what she understood. That returning home wasn't a simple return, that the world she was going back to was not the same world that had been in place when the boat left the harbor. That the fight wasn't over. It was just entering a different phase. I've been building the case in my head, she said. Everything I remember. Every document, every number, every conversation. I've been going over it every morning while you think I'm sleeping. You're not sleeping in the mornings. Sometimes I'm sleeping. The rest of the time, I'm building a case against the man who may have tried to have me killed. He stared at her for a long moment. You are, he said, genuinely unlike any person I have ever met. Is that a compliment? I'm still deciding. She almost smiled. While you decide, I need you to understand something. What I've just told you. When we get back, you may be a witness. To what I've told you here. To what we've observed, to the timeline. She looked at him steadily. This could become complicated for you. He picked up a piece of wood and added it to the fire. I'm already on a deserted island because of your ship, he said. I think complicated is already the situation. I'm serious. So am I. He met her eyes. I'm not going anywhere. Figuratively, we're already nowhere. When we get home, you tell me what you need, I'll do what I can. She held his gaze. Why? She said, not challenging, genuinely asking. This isn't your fight. He thought about it. Really thought about it in the way he did, taking it seriously, not dismissing it with an easy answer. Because what you're describing is someone who decided that your life was worth less than their financial interest, he said. And I have a problem with that. On principle. On principle, she repeated. Also, he said with a slightly different tone. You helped me tape my shoulder on day 1, and you didn't make it weird, which I respect. She laughed. She laughed the way she'd been laughing here, surprised by it not quite catching it in time to stop it, more honest than she would have chosen to be. "Okay," she said, "on principle, and the shoulder tape. Deal." Day 8 on the island began with a sound Ethan had been waiting for and had almost stopped believing he would hear. Not rescue, not yet, but something. He was at the northern outcrop, maintaining the signal fire, when he heard it, a distant rhythmic sound that was not wind, not birds, not the island's usual vocabulary of noise. He stood very still and listened the way his father had taught him to listen, with his whole body, not just his ears. A helicopter, far away. But a helicopter. He added everything he had onto the signal fire in the next 45 seconds. Coconut husks, which made thick, dark smoke. Green leaves, which made it white. Everything he'd been saving for exactly this moment. Then he ran back to get Victoria. She heard him coming before she could see him. His footsteps on the ground, his breathing the specific quality of urgency that was different from his usual movement, and she was already on her feet when he arrived. "Something's out there," he said. She didn't ask questions. She ran with him. They stood on the outcrop together, watching the smoke climb, watching the direction where the sound had come from. And Ethan was calculating angle distance. Whether the smoke was visible from that direction in these conditions. And Victoria was doing something with her hands, the signal mirror he'd made from debris, angling it at the sky with the focused precision of someone who understood reflection angles. The sound grew, not a lot. But it grew. "It's changing direction," she said. "I hear it. It's coming. I hear it." And then they both heard. It heard the specific shift in the engine sound that meant a change of heading, a turn toward something, and Victoria made a sound that Ethan had never heard from her. Not a word, not controlled. Just a sound from somewhere past the armor and the strategy and the careful management, a sound that was just human. He grabbed her hand. He didn't plan to. His hand just moved the same way it had moved to catch her wrist in the water, the body knowing something before the mind catches up. She held it. The helicopter came over the eastern tree line. It was orange, Coast Guard orange, and it was close enough that Ethan could see the person in the door before it banked to circle, and that person was pointing, and someone was on a radio, and the aircraft was circling them, circling their smoke, circling the signal pattern Victoria had spent an afternoon building on the beach. Ethan Walker stood on a rock in the middle of the ocean and let out a breath that had been building for 8 days. Next to him, Victoria Hayes was shaking. Just slightly. Just the edges of it. Her hand in his, her eyes on the helicopter, and she was shaking in the specific way of someone who has been holding something enormous for a very long time and has just been given permission to put it down. "I told you," he said. "You told me," she said. "When? Day 1. You said we were going to get home." "I said you were going to get home," he corrected. "I included myself in that." She squeezed his hand once, then released it. Because the helicopter was descending, and there were things to do and signals to make, and she was even now the person who moved toward the next action. But she'd held it. For those seconds, she'd held it. And Ethan filed that away in the place where he kept the things that mattered. The rescue was not the clean cinematic thing that Ethan had in weak moments imagined. It was loud and disorganized, and the Coast Guard personnel who came down on the line were professional, but overwhelmed with information, and there were medical assessments and radio calls, and a great deal of noise. Victoria went into professional mode, immediately answering questions, crisply providing the information they needed, coordinating the way she coordinated everything. Ethan watched her transform back into the version of herself that the world knew, and he noticed the seams. He could see where the island her ended and the public her began, and he noted with something he couldn't quite name that the seams were visible now in a way they hadn't been in the early hours of day 1. She noticed him noticing. She caught his eye across the noise and commotion, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement brief and private, the language of people who have shared something that doesn't translate into the ordinary world. In the helicopter, before the noise became total, She leaned close enough to say something only he could hear. "Marcus," she said. "They found the raft. Everyone from the crew, 2 injuries non-critical. Marcus is at a hospital in—" She gave the city name, but the wind took it. "He's okay." The relief that moved through Ethan was physical. He felt it in his chest and his shoulders, in the specific place where he'd been carrying that weight since she'd brought back the bag from the waterline. "Good," he said. "His daughter is with him," Victoria said. "The patch is still on the bag." He looked at her. She was looking straight ahead, jaw set, eyes forward, every inch the composed executive. Except for her hands. She was doing the thing, the 3 fingers, the silent scale, and she didn't know she was doing it. He didn't tell her. He looked out at the ocean falling away beneath them and thought Emma. He thought it the way a compass needle finds north automatically, with the certainty of something that doesn't require choice. Emma. School. Mrs. Patterson. Peanut butter pancakes. He was going home. But something else was true too. Something that sat alongside the going home, without contradicting it. 8 days on an island had rearranged some things inside him that he hadn't known needed rearranging. Things about what he thought he was worth. Things about what he thought he deserved. Things about the story he'd been telling himself quietly since Sarah died, that the right thing to do was to keep his head down, do his work, raise his daughter, and not want anything that felt like too much. Victoria Hayes, who had come aboard his job site with a phone in one hand and a tablet in the other, and 3 seconds to assess his usefulness, had somewhere in the middle of everything else looked at him like he was something worth looking at. Not as an employee, not as a function, as a man. He didn't know what to do with that yet. He wasn't going to figure it out at altitude in a rescue helicopter with his shoulder still taped and his clothes still carrying 8 days of island on them, but he knew it was there. The hospital was efficient and slightly overwhelming, which was a combination Ethan tolerated for approximately 3 hours before the need to get to Emma became overriding, and he started being in the most polite way he could manage, extremely clear with everyone who approached him about the fact that he needed a phone and then he needed a car. He got the phone first. He called Mrs. Patterson's number from memory. It rang twice. "Mrs. Patterson, it's Ethan Walker." His voice came out steadier than he expected. There was a sound on the other end that he would think about for a long time. Not a word. Just the particular sound a person makes when they've been waiting for something with their whole body and it finally arrives. "Oh, thank God," she said. "Oh, Ethan. Oh, that sweet girl. Is she there?" A pause. A shuffle. A voice in the background that he heard through 8 days of ocean and distance, and a cellular connection, and it landed in his chest like something physical. "Dad?" He closed his eyes. "Hey, Bug," he said. The silence on Emma's end lasted about 2 seconds. He could reconstruct it later, the processing the disbelief the moment a child's nervous system updates its worst assumption. And then, "You didn't come home." "I know." "You said always." "I know." His voice, to his own surprise, was still steady. "I know I did. I'm coming home. Right now. I'm coming home today." Another silence. Then, very small, the kind of voice Emma used when she was trying not to cry, because she thought it made her look babyish, and she was almost 9, and almost 9 was basically grown. "Promise." "Emma, I promise. I will be there in 2 hours, and I want peanut butter pancakes." A sound on the other end that was both a laugh and a sob, and was his favorite sound in the world. "I'll tell Mrs. Patterson," Emma said. "Okay, Bug." "Dad?" "Yeah." A lady called, on Mrs. Patterson's phone. She said her name was... A small pause. "She said she worked for you, and that you were safe, and that you were coming home. She called 2 hours ago." Ethan stood very still. What was her name? She didn't say her name, but she sounded important. Emma's voice was very matter-of-fact. She sounded like someone who was used to people listening to her. He looked across the hospital corridor. 30 feet away, Victoria Hayes was on her own phone, still managing, still coordinating, already beginning the process of rebuilding the world she'd left behind. As he watched, she turned her head slightly, the way people do when they feel eyes on them, and looked directly at him. He held up the phone. She understood immediately. Of course she did. She always understood immediately, and something moved across her face that was so quick he almost missed it. A flash of something that might have been relief or satisfaction, or something he didn't have a word for yet. She nodded once, went back to her call. Ethan turned back to the window, to the ordinary daylight world outside, to the sound of his daughter's breathing on the line. "I'll be there in 2 hours," he said. "Don't eat without me." "I already ate dinner twice." "Then eat a third time. I'm your dad. I make the pancakes." And Emma laughed. Really laughed, the 8-year-old version, without self-consciousness. The laugh that Ethan had replayed in his head on the island, when things felt most pressing, and he stood in the hospital corridor and let it fill him up, and thought, this is what matters. This exact thing. This is the whole answer. He believed that, completely. But a quieter part of him, the part that had been rearranged in the last 8 days, added something underneath it. A small addendum. A note in the margin. And maybe that's not all that matters. Maybe there's room for more than one true thing at a time. He wasn't sure. He wasn't going to chase it today, or maybe for a while. There was too much that needed doing first. There was Emma to get home to, and a life to rebuild, and Victoria had a company to reclaim, and a conspiracy to expose, and battles ahead that made their 8 days of survival look straightforward. But the thought was there, and it wasn't going away. He put it somewhere careful and walked back down the corridor to find someone who could tell him where to get a car. Not yet. Victoria found him 30 minutes later in the hospital's small waiting room on the first floor. She'd changed into clothes someone had brought for her. She was already arranged again, presentable. Every surface managed. But she moved through the door with something in her walk that wasn't quite what it had been on the boat. Wasn't the version of her that had stepped past him on the stern, with 3 seconds of eye contact and a question about engine timing. She sat down across from him, not beside him, across which he recognized as a choice. "My attorney is flying in tomorrow morning," she said. "I have a call with my board in 2 hours. I have 2 federal agencies I need to contact and a litigation team that's about to have a very busy 6 months." "Good," he said. "I'm going to need your statement. Formally. What you witnessed on the ship, the timeline of events, your professional assessment of the engine condition when you boarded." She paused. "My attorney will reach out." "Okay." She looked at him. "Ethan?" "Yeah, I'm going to fix this," she said. "The company, the acquisition, the person responsible. I'm going to fix all of it." She said it the same way she'd said everything on the island, that she meant absolutely not for performance, not for reassurance, but like a decision already made, already implemented, already done. "I know you will," he said. "And I'm going to—" She stopped, looked at her hands, then looked back at him. "I don't have a word for what I want to say." He waited. "I had a plan for my life," she said. "I've had it since I was 19 years old. Every year was accounted for. Every goal had a timeline. Every decision was inside the framework." She met his eyes. 8 days on an island were not in the framework. "No," he agreed. "You were not in the framework." He held her gaze, didn't say anything because there wasn't anything to say that would be more honest than just receiving what she was saying. "I don't know what to do with things that aren't in the framework," she said. "I'm very good at most things. I am genuinely not good at this." "What's this?" She made a small gesture that encompassed somehow the whole of the last 8 days. "This," she said. He leaned forward slightly. "Victoria, what did you ask me on the beach the first morning?" She was still for a moment. Then, "Why did you come back for me?" "And what did I say?" "Because you were still up there." "Right." He looked at her steadily. "You don't have to have a framework for everything. Some things just happen because the situation calls for them. You figure out what they mean after." She studied him. The way she'd studied him across the fire on night 2, or the morning she'd said, "I cannot figure you out." But this time it was different. This time, she wasn't trying to file him into a category. "Peanut butter pancakes," she said. "What? Emma, you said she likes peanut butter pancakes." Her voice was careful. "I want to try them. I meant that. When there's time." She looked away briefly, looked back. "If the invitation is still open." He thought about Emma's voice on the phone 40 minutes ago. The laugh. She sounded like someone who was used to people listening to her. "The invitation is still open," he said. Victoria Hayes nodded. Once. The way she nodded when something was decided. Outside the hospital windows, the ordinary world continued its ordinary business, entirely unaware that two people were sitting across from each other in a waiting room, trying to work out the grammar of something neither of them had a language for yet. The beacon had pulsed its signal to the sky. The signal had been received. They were back in the world. But the world they were back in was not quite the same world they had left. And the people sitting in that waiting room were not quite the same people who had boarded a ship 8 days ago. Something had happened in the space between. Something that the storm had made, and the island had shaped, and the fire had forged between them across all those nights. Ethan Walker picked up his phone and called for a car, and Victoria Hayes on the other side of the room turned back to the window with an expression on her face that she did not catch in time to control. Something that looked to anyone paying attention like the very beginning of hope. The drive home took 2 hours and 14 minutes, and Ethan counted every one of them. The car. Victoria's team had arranged a black sedan, quiet and clean. The kind of car that existed in a category he didn't usually occupy, felt strange in ways that had nothing to do with the car itself. It was the smoothness of it, the controlled temperature, the absence of wind and salt, and the particular texture of ground under his feet. His body had recalibrated over 8 days to a different set of physical inputs, and the ordinary world was now presenting itself as faintly surreal, like a room he'd lived in for years, but was seeing for the first time after a long absence. He sat in the back seat and watched the highway move past the window and thought about Emma. He did not think about what was behind him, the hospital, the debrief with the Coast Guard officers, the careful, measured conversation with Victoria's attorney, who had arrived somehow within 90 minutes of the helicopter landing as if she'd been on standby. He did not think about the questions he hadn't fully answered yet, about the things Victoria had told him on the island, about Daniel Rourke and financial records, and the particular shape of a conspiracy that was still, as far as the world was concerned, successfully hidden. He thought about Emma. He thought about peanut butter pancakes. He thought about the way she'd said promise, and the way her laugh had come through the phone like a correction to something. The car pulled up to his street at 11:17 at night, and Mrs. Patterson's porch light was on, and through the front window of her house, he could see the blue flicker of a television, because Mrs. Patterson fell asleep in front of the TV every single night, and had done for as long as he'd known her. He was out of the car before it fully stopped. Mrs. Patterson opened the door before he knocked. She was 71 years old, and had the grip of someone who had spent a lifetime meaning it, and she put both arms around him and held on in the way that older women sometimes hold on without apology, without self-consciousness, just the pure physical fact of relief. "You terrible man," she said into his shoulder. "You absolute terrible man, scaring us like that." "I know," he said. "I know, I'm sorry." "Emma wouldn't sleep. I told her she needed to sleep. She said she'd sleep when you were home." "I said that's not how sleep works." She said she didn't care. "Where is she?" Mrs. Patterson stepped back, pointed at the couch. Emma was asleep on the couch with her arms wrapped around the throw pillow he recognized from their own living room. She'd apparently brought it over, which was such an Emma thing to do, that something in his chest did a complicated movement. She was wearing her school sweatshirt, and her hair was in the lopsided braid she'd learned to do herself after Sarah died, the one that was never quite even because she couldn't reach the back properly, and she was completely, deeply, legitimately asleep. He crouched down beside the couch. He didn't wake her. He just looked at her the way he'd been looking at her since she was born, with the particular combination of gratitude and terror that parenthood installed permanently. Then he put his hand very gently on her back, and she woke up. Not with a start. Not with alarm. She just opened her eyes and looked at him like she'd been expecting him in her sleep, like some part of her had been listening for him all along. "You're late," she said. "I know. You said 2 hours. It was closer to 3, I'm sorry." Emma sat up. She looked at his face with the focused intensity that 8-year-olds brought to the things that actually mattered to them. She was checking him. Running her own assessment the way she'd been doing since her mother died, this careful, constant monitoring of the people she loved for signs of damage. Then she threw herself at him. He caught her. He held on. He put his face in her hair and breathed and felt the specific weight and warmth of his daughter, and the thing that had been wound tight in his chest for 8 days released all at once in a way that was physical and undeniable. She didn't cry. Neither did he. They just held on, the two of them, in Mrs. Patterson's living room at 11:17 on a Wednesday night, and the world reoriented around that fixed point. "Peanut butter pancakes," Emma said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "Promise." "Emma." "I know," she said. "I know. Always." Bad. He carried her home and put her to bed, and sat in the chair beside her bed for 45 minutes, which he told himself was to make sure she was fully settled, but was actually because he needed to be in the same room as her, at rest in the dark, with the ordinary sounds of their ordinary house around him. The refrigerator, the wind against the window, the radiator doing its specific tick. He fell asleep in the chair. When he woke up, it was 4:30 in the morning, and Emma was sitting up in bed looking at him. "You snored," she said. "I don't snore." "You were snoring a lot." He rubbed his face. "I was on an island for 8 days. Is that why?" "I think that's why." She considered this with the philosophical openness of someone who hadn't yet decided which things required explanation and which things just were. "The lady called again," she said. "Last night, while you were sleeping." He was immediately alert. "What lady?" "The same one, from before." Emma pulled at a loose thread on her blanket. She said her name this time, Victoria. She said she just wanted to make sure you got home okay, and that she was sorry if it was too late to call. Emma looked up. "It was pretty late." "It was," he said. "Did she say anything else?" Emma thought about it. "She said to tell you she looked up peanut butter pancakes, and they sound disgusting." Ethan laughed. Genuinely, fully the first laugh that had come without calculation since before the ship. Emma looked pleased with herself, which was the correct response. She also said, Emma continued with the very careful tone of a child reporting something they'd been instructed to get exactly right, that she's going to be busy for a while, but she meant what she said. She said you'd know what that means. He did know. "Go back to sleep," he said. "I'm not tired. It's 4:30 in the morning." "I slept at Mrs. Patterson's." "You slept for 20 minutes. It felt longer." Emma. "Fine." She lay back down. Then, "Dad." "Yeah." "Is she nice, the Victoria lady?" He thought about how to answer that. About all the versions of the answer that were true simultaneously. The woman on the boat deck with efficiency in her voice and no time for sentiment. And the woman crouched by a stream saying, "Show me." And the woman who had called his daughter's babysitter from a rescue helicopter to say he was safe before she'd even confirmed her own survival status with her own board. "She's complicated," he said. Emma absorbed that. "Mrs. Patterson says all interesting people are complicated. Mrs. Patterson is a wise woman." "She said you'd say that." Emma pulled her blanket up. "She said interesting people always know other interesting people." He sat in the dark and listened to his daughter's breathing, even out into sleep, and thought about a woman 30 miles away in a hotel that her team had arranged, sitting with a phone in her hand, and a board call in the morning, and a conspiracy to dismantle who had called a number she'd gotten from a Coast Guard relay at 11:30 at night to make sure a man she'd met 8 days ago had gotten home. He thought about that for a long time. 3 days later, the story broke. Not the version Ethan had been living. The public version. The one that made every major news outlet and trended nationally by 6 in the morning. Tech billionaire Victoria Hayes found alive after ship disaster. 8 days stranded. Coast Guard rescue. The details were sparse and carefully managed, which was consistent with every indication Ethan had of how Victoria operated in public. She had given a single statement. She thanked the Coast Guard. She thanked the crew. She mentioned with characteristic efficiency that an investigation into the cause of the accident was ongoing. She did not mention him by name. He'd expected that. He wasn't sure how he felt about it, which was different from being bothered by it. He was a private person by nature. The idea of his name in national news coverage produced a specific low-level anxiety he was glad to avoid. But there was a small, quiet thing underneath. That's something he noticed without naming. Dale called at 7:30 that morning. "Turn on the news," he said. Which was how Ethan learned that Dale did not understand, that Ethan already knew because Ethan had been there. "I know," Ethan said. "You know you were on that ship." "I was." A long pause. "And you didn't call me." "I called you from the hospital. You didn't answer." "I was Ethan Mann. I didn't know it was you. I thought it was a telemarketer." Dale stopped, regrouped. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." "Your shoulder. Taped." "You need time off." "I need to come back to work," Ethan said. "I need the routine." He paused. "Also, my truck needs brake pads and I still have rent." Dale laughed. It was the helpless, relieved laugh of someone who had apparently spent 8 days with a level of worry he hadn't disclosed until now. "Okay, Monday. But if you need more time." "Monday," Ethan said. He hung up and made pancakes. The peanut butter pancakes became in the weeks that followed the fixed point of a new kind of routine. Every Saturday morning. Emma at the kitchen counter doing what she called helping, which meant she handed him ingredients in the wrong order and narrated his technique with unsolicited opinions. It was the best hour of his week every week, and it had been since before the island. The island had just clarified what he'd always known about it. The news cycle moved fast. By the end of the first week, Victoria Hayes had disappeared from the front pages, replaced by other disasters and other dramas. And the investigation into the ship accident became a procedural background note. Ethan fielded 2 calls from lawyers his own, a local man named Peterson, who handled the kind of cases that working people needed handled, and then one from Victoria's legal team, professionally courteous, explaining the process for his formal statement. He gave the statement. All of it. The engine condition when he boarded the coupling, the timeline, the conversation with the captain, the storm, the sequence of events. He was precise and factual, and didn't editorialize. Peterson sat beside him, and occasionally said, "That's enough for now," and the lawyers nodded and typed. At the end, Victoria's attorney, a sharp, composed woman named Lena Park, who reminded Ethan slightly of Victoria in the way she occupied a room, looked up from her notes and said, "Mr. Walker, are you aware that you may be called as a witness in both civil and criminal proceedings?" "Victoria told me that might happen," he said. "On the island." Lena Park blinked. "She told you about the case on the island. She told me what she suspected. Who she suspected." He met the attorney's eyes. "She was building her case while we were stranded, in her head. Every morning." He paused. "You should know that. Whatever she's told you, she remembers all of it. She was reviewing it every day." Lena Park looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't quite categorize. Then she wrote something down. "I'll note that," she said. 2 weeks after the rescue, Ethan's phone rang at 8 in the evening with a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer. Then something made him answer. "You got home okay?" Victoria said. Not a question. More like the opening move of a conversation she'd been planning. "I got home okay," he confirmed. "You?" "I'm in New York. I've been in meetings for 11 days. A pause. "I don't mean that as a complaint. I'm built for meetings. I just..." She stopped, started again. "I wanted to call." "I know, Emma told me." "She did?" "She said the peanut butter pancakes sounded disgusting." A beat. Then, "They do sound disgusting. I looked them up." "You have to taste them. The description doesn't do them justice." I maintain my position until presented with evidence. He settled back into his kitchen chair, which he'd been sitting in while helping Emma with homework before she went to bed. The house was quiet. The particular quiet of after Emma, which was his favorite kind of quiet, and also the loneliest kind. "How's the board situation?" "Controlled." Her voice went slightly flatter the way it did when she was giving information without editorializing. "Daniel resigned 3 days ago. My attorney is letting him believe that's sufficient. It is not sufficient. The federal investigation opened yesterday." Another pause. "He thought I was dead. He had 11 days to settle into believing it. The look on his face when I walked into the board meeting..." She stopped. "What did you do?" Ethan asked. "I sat down," she said. "I opened my laptop. I presented the restructured acquisition proposal. And I didn't look at him once. A beat. I didn't need to. The lawyers handled the rest." "Victoria." "Yes." "Are you okay?" The pause was longer this time. It was not the pause of someone who hadn't been asked that question. It was the pause of someone who had been asked it many times by many people in the last 2 weeks and had given a professional answer each time and was deciding whether to give a different one now. "I'm functional," she said. "That's not what I asked." She made a sound that was almost a laugh. "No, it's not." Another pause. "It's strange. Coming back to something you built after someone tried to take it away. It should feel like victory, maybe. Like winning. But it feels more like..." She searched for the word. "Like arriving home after a long trip and finding all the furniture has been moved 2 inches in every direction. Everything is technically the same. But your body remembers where things were." He thought about that. "You're describing what happens to the house when the things inside it change," he said. "That's exactly what I'm describing," she said. "Which is strange, because I don't think of the company as home." "What do you think of as home?" A very long pause. "I don't know," she said. "I haven't known for a long time." Then quieter. "I'm starting to think that's not okay." He didn't push on that. He'd learned when to let things be. "How's Emma?" she asked. And the shift was deliberate. He could hear her choosing it, but it wasn't deflection exactly. It was more like she was moving toward something rather than away from it. "She's good. She's obsessed with a book about sea turtles, so every dinner involves facts about sea turtles. She asked me last night why sea turtles always go back to the beach where they were born." "What did you say?" "I said maybe some things just know where they belong." Silence. Then, "That's a very good answer." She didn't think so. She said the real answer is magnetic fields. Victoria laughed. The real one, the low, surprised one that he'd first heard on the island and had been cataloging ever since the one she didn't catch in time. "She's right about the magnetic fields," she said. "I know. I looked it up after." "How old is she again?" 8. Almost 9. "She sounds like 15. "She's always sounded like 15, Ethan said. "I think some kids come in one size." Another silence, but a good one. The kind of silence he'd learned to recognize from the island as the space where 2 people weren't performing conversation, but just existing in it. "I'm coming to the coast next week," Victoria said. "For the deposition. I'll be there Thursday." He waited. "I thought..." She stopped. "I was wondering if..." She stopped again, which was so unlike the version of her he'd met on the boat that it was almost disorienting. Victoria Hayes did not stumble over sentences. Victoria Hayes had never met a sentence she couldn't close with efficiency and precision. "Thursday evening," he said. "After the deposition. We'll make pancakes." A pause. "That's what you were going to suggest, right?" he said. "Yes," she said. "That's what I was going to suggest." "Okay then." "Okay then," she echoed. And then, "Tell Emma the sea turtle thing about magnetic fields is correct. The science is accurate. But your answer wasn't wrong either." He was smiling in the dark of his kitchen, and he didn't try to stop it. "I'll tell her." Thursday came with the particular velocity of things you've been anticipating. Ethan went to work in the morning, the harbor, the familiar weight of tools, the smell of diesel and salt that had been part of his identity since his father first put a wrench in his hand. Dale treated him with a careful normalcy that was itself a form of kindness, not making the island into something that had to be discussed constantly, just letting it be something that had happened and was now part of the ledger. By 3 in the afternoon, he was done. He picked up Emma from school. She came out talking before she'd fully cleared the door. Something about a project. Something about sea turtles again. Something about whether Dad had remembered that tonight was the night the famous lady was coming. He had remembered. "She's not famous," he said. "She's on the internet. A lot of people are on the internet. She has a Wikipedia page." "Emma. I looked her up," Emma said with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who found this entirely reasonable. "I wanted to know if she was a good person." He glanced at her. "And?" Emma thought about it with the particular seriousness she applied to important questions. "Wikipedia says she's successful," she said. "It doesn't really say if she's good." She looked at him. "But you wouldn't have a friend who wasn't good." He thought about the woman who had said no one has ever done that for me on a beach in the dark, who had held his hand when the helicopter came and then released it before anyone could see, who had called his daughter's house at 11:30 at night to say her father was safe. "No," he said, "I wouldn't." Emma nodded, satisfied. "Okay, what are we making for dinner besides pancakes?" "Pancakes are dinner. That's not—" She stopped, assessed. "Okay, actually that's fine." Victoria arrived at 6:47. Not 6:30, not 7. 6:47, which was so precisely between the time he'd given her and the polite outer limit of late that he suspected she'd timed it. She was in clothes that were less formal than anything he'd seen her in before, but still carried the specific quality of things chosen with intention, and she was holding a book. A sea turtle book. Not the one Emma had. A different one. Larger. He could see the cover photograph's reference quality, the kind of book a person bought when they took something seriously. Emma opened the door before Victoria could knock. They looked at each other, the billionaire CEO who had survived 8 days on a deserted island and was in the middle of dismantling a federal conspiracy, and the almost 9-year-old who made lopsided braids and kept a promise journal and had waited 4 nights for her father to come home. "You're Victoria," Emma said. "I am," Victoria said. "I looked you up." "I know. I have Google alerts." Emma blinked. "You knew I looked you up. I knew someone in this area searched my name 4 times in 3 days from a device registered to a Patricia Patterson." A pause. "I have a very thorough security team." Emma turned to Ethan with an expression that communicated clearly and entirely non-verbally. "This is the coolest thing that has ever happened." "She brought you something," Ethan said. Victoria held out the book. Emma took it with both hands, looked at the cover, and then looked up at Victoria with an expression that Ethan recognized. It was the expression Emma used when something had earned full respect, the expression she usually reserved for excellent books and the sea. "It's the one with the magnetic navigation chapter," Victoria said. "The science is very good, but the author also admits we don't fully understand it yet." She glanced at Ethan briefly. "Sometimes both things are true. The science and the mystery." Emma looked at her father, then back at Victoria. "Come in," she said, with the authority of someone who had decided the matter was settled. "Dad's making pancakes, but I'm helping, so they'll actually be good." Victoria met Ethan's eyes over Emma's head as Emma turned toward the kitchen. What passed between them in that glance lasted about 2 seconds, and said somehow everything that 2 people who had spent 8 days surviving together and 2 weeks apart, accumulating the weight of almost said things, had been building toward. He stepped back from the door. She walked in. The pancakes were objectively excellent. Emma's helping consisted of adding more peanut butter than the recipe specified, which turned out to be an improvement. Victoria sat at the kitchen counter on one of the 2 stools that constituted their breakfast seating situation, and watched Ethan cook with an expression he'd come to recognize, the one where she was absorbing something and deciding whether she had the right to want it. You can help, Emma told her. Dad lets me pour the batter. I'm better at observing, Victoria said. That's what people say when they're afraid to try. Victoria looked at Emma with what Ethan could only describe as startled recognition. You're right, she said. That is what people say. She held out her hand. Give me the spoon. Emma gave her the spoon. The batter that Victoria poured was extremely precise, perfectly circular. Ethan watched her face as she did it, the focus, the same focus she'd had on everything from signal fire to legal strategy applied now to breakfast food in a small kitchen in a coastal town. You're a very focused person, Emma told her. I am. My dad says that's good, but you have to know when to stop focusing and just be somewhere. Victoria set the spoon down and looked at Emma with something that moved through her expression in layers too fast to fully catch. Your dad says that all the time. He says sometimes you have to just be where you are. She glanced at Ethan, who was minding the pan and also minding this conversation very carefully. He's right about that, she said. He's right about a lot of things, Emma said with casual certainty. He's also wrong about some things. He thought the peanut butter brand mattered, and it doesn't. And he thinks 10 o'clock is a reasonable bedtime, which it isn't. What is a reasonable bedtime? Emma appeared to give this serious consideration. 11. That seems late for someone your age. Dad says that too. Emma looked unimpressed. I'm almost 9. I'll accept that argument when you're actually 9, Ethan said from the stove. Emma turned to Victoria. You see what I deal with? And Victoria laughed. Not the small caught-off-guard version. A real one from somewhere that had been opened up on an island and apparently hadn't fully closed since. Emma looked delighted. Ethan didn't turn around from the stove because he needed a moment. They ate pancakes at the small kitchen table. Emma asked Victoria 11 questions about her company, 3 about the island, and 1 about whether Victoria knew how to build a fire, which led to Victoria describing the kindling situation in a way that was quietly self-deprecating. And Emma said with complete sincerity, Dad taught me to build a fire too. He's a good teacher. And the table went quiet for just a moment, the specific quiet of something true that nobody needed to add to. After dinner, Emma disappeared to her room with the sea turtle book, which was what Ethan had known she would do, and he and Victoria sat at the kitchen table with what was left of the coffee and the ordinary quiet of a house in the evening. She's extraordinary, Victoria said. I know. She looks at you like you're... She stopped, looked at her hands. The 3 fingers, the silent scale. Like you're the thing everything else is measured against. She's had a lot of loss, Ethan said. It does something to how you hold the things you still have. Victoria was quiet for a moment. I have a meeting tomorrow that may determine whether I keep my company or spend the next 18 months in litigation. I have a board that is cautiously supportive, but not unconditionally so. I have 4,000 employees whose stability depends on decisions I'm going to make in the next 90 days. She looked at him. And sitting here right now is the most... She stopped. Found the word. Settled I have felt in longer than I can remember. He held her gaze. Good, he said. It scares me, she said. The settled feeling, because I don't know how to keep it. You don't keep it, he said. You just come back to it when you can. She looked at him for a long moment. Like sea turtles, she said. Like sea turtles, he agreed. The thing between them had a shape now. It had been shapeless on the island, and then suggestion-shaped in the hospital, and then distance-shaped across 2 weeks of phone calls and formal statements, and the ordinary machinery of 2 lives in different categories. But here in the kitchen, with Emma's lamp visible under her bedroom door, and the coffee cooling, and the night doing what nights did, it had a shape. Neither of them named it. They'd both lived enough to know that naming things prematurely was how you broke them. But it was there, solid as the table between them, real as the fire they'd built from nothing on a beach in the dark. I have to be in court at 8, Victoria said, and moved to stand. I know. Thursday next week is the federal hearing, My attorney wants me in New York by Wednesday. I know. The acquisition closes in 3 weeks if everything holds. After that, she stopped. After that, there's a thing I've been thinking about. A different kind of project. Less about the company, more about... She looked for the word again. People. Families. The kind of things that don't make it onto the balance sheet. He looked at her. I want to tell you about it, she said. When there's time. Tell me now. She blinked. It's late. Victoria. He said it the way he'd said it on the ladder in the storm, with the specific quality of someone who meant it and was not in a hurry and was not going anywhere. Tell me now. She sat back down. She told him. And Ethan Walker, who had never been in a boardroom, who had spent his adult life below decks and in harbor garages and in the small, specific world of a single father in a coastal town, listened to the most powerful woman he'd ever met describe wanting to build something for the people that the powerful world left behind. For the families like his, for the workers like him, for the children like Emma who grew up understanding too early that the net below the tightrope was not always guaranteed. He listened, and as he listened, something shifted in the picture he'd been carrying in his head of what the next part of his life looked like. Not replaced. Expanded. Like a room that turned out to have another room behind it, one he hadn't known to look for. From behind Emma's door came the sound of pages turning. A small noise in a small house in a town that nobody famous had ever come from. And in the kitchen, the two most different people in any room they'd ever shared talked until the coffee was cold and the night was complete, and neither of them looked at the clock. The federal hearing lasted 4 days. Ethan knew this because Victoria texted him at the end of each one. Not long messages, not the kind of messages that required response or opened into conversation, just short, precise dispatches the way someone checks in when they want another person to know they're still standing without making it into a request for anything. Day 1, Rourke testified. His attorney is good, mine is better. Day 2, financial forensics presented. The numbers don't lie, they never do. Day 3, nothing until 11:40 at night, and then long day. Emma still reading the Turtle book. He'd smiled at that one in the dark of his living room and typed back, "She's moved on to a book about deep-sea fish. The anglerfish chapter has been described to me 17 times. The response came back in under a minute. The bioluminescence is genuinely remarkable. He'd put his phone down and thought about the fact that Victoria Hayes, 3 weeks out of a federal conspiracy and in the middle of a hearing that would determine the future of her company and possibly the criminal future of her former CFO, had Googled anglerfish. He thought about that for a long time. Day 4. It's done. Grand jury indictment. All 4 of them. He read that one standing in the parking lot of the harbor at 7 in the morning, still holding his coffee, and he felt something that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite satisfaction, but lived in the neighborhood of both. The right thing happening. The machinery of consequence working the way it was supposed to, which was not guaranteed, and was never something you took for granted when you'd watched it not work for other people. He called her. Not texted. Called. She answered on the second ring. 4, he said. 4, she confirmed. Her voice was steady in the specific way it was steady when she was holding something large very carefully. Rourke, his outside contact, and 2 members of the acquisition target's legal team who were working with him. A pause. It goes deeper than I thought. Which means it also explains some things that didn't make sense before. Like what? Like why the deal kept hitting procedural delays. Like why 2 of my board members were suddenly very interested in succession planning 8 months ago. She exhaled. Rourke wasn't working alone. He was the visible piece. The people behind him wanted the acquisition to fail, wanted me out of the way, and wanted to move on my company before the dust settled. And now they're going to need better lawyers, she said, with the particular flatness that was her version of satisfaction. He leaned against his truck. Victoria. Yes. How are you? The pause this time was the kind she'd been doing less often. The processing pause, the one where she decided, how much of the real answer to give. On the island, the pause had gotten shorter over time, the gap between the question and the honest response narrowing as the armor thinned. It had been 3 weeks since the island, and the pause was still shorter than it used to be. "I'm tired," she said. "Deeply fundamentally tired in a way that I haven't let myself feel in about 11 years, because there was always the next thing." Another pause. "But I'm okay. I think I'm actually okay." She said it like someone testing the weight of it. "That's new." "Good new." "Ask me in a week," she said. "When I've slept." "Sleep," he said. "That's an order." "You don't give me orders." "I absolutely give you orders. You just don't follow them. There's a difference." She laughed. The real one. "I'll sleep," she said. "And then I'm coming back to the coast. There's something I need to do in person, and I've been waiting until the hearing was finished." "What something?" "You'll see," she said and hung up. Come. She arrived on a Saturday. Not Thursday this time, not a weeknight with a deposition attached. A Saturday morning when the light came in sideways off the water, and Emma was already awake and had been for 2 hours, and had opinions about what kind of music should be playing when a person arrived. "No music," Ethan said. "Background music is important for atmosphere." Emma. "Fine." She went back to her book, which was now about octopuses. Ethan had learned more about cephalopod cognition in the past 2 weeks than he'd ever expected to know. He'd also learned that Emma processed new important things by reading that when something significant was happening in her world, she dove into books the way other people dove into other things, using knowledge as a way of holding on to the ground. He understood that. He'd been doing his own version of it, more work hours, more careful attention to the small mechanics of their daily life. The specific focus of a man who was trying to stay rooted while something large was shifting in his peripheral vision. Victoria arrived at 10:12. She had Marcus with her. Ethan had not expected Marcus. He recognized him from the description more than the face. The bag with the daughter's patch, the 6 years of knowing exactly how Victoria took her coffee, the man who had been in the water and had made it to the raft, and had spent 8 days in a hospital, while his 4-year-old sat beside him with a coloring book. He was smaller than Ethan had pictured, quieter, with the specific quality of someone who had recently been very close to a very large thing, and was still recalibrating the scale of everything else. He extended his hand when they met. "You pulled her out of the water," he said. "She pulled herself out," Ethan said. "I just made sure she didn't go back in." Marcus looked at him for a moment with an expression that was too complex to categorize, and then nodded once in the way that men sometimes acknowledge things that don't require more words. Emma appeared at Ethan's elbow. She looked at Marcus, then at his bag, the patched strap, the small iron-on cartoon turtle that his daughter had pressed on at some point, and that had survived the ocean and the wreckage and the hospital. Emma looked at the patch for a long moment. "My dad told me about your daughter," she said. "He said she put the turtle on your bag." Marcus looked down at the strap. "She did," he said. "Her name's Maya. She's 4. Emma nodded seriously. "My dad's good at coming home," she said. "I think yours is too." Marcus made a sound that was not quite a word. He pressed his lips together and looked at the ceiling for a moment, and Ethan had the diplomatic instinct to say, "Who wants coffee?" and move everyone toward the kitchen. Victoria held back for half a second. She was looking at Emma, watching Emma take Marcus by the hand and explain the octopus book, because Emma was constitutionally incapable of not telling people about whatever she was reading, and the expression on her face was the one she didn't catch in time. The one Ethan had learned to recognize across 8 days and 3 weeks of distance. "You okay?" he said low enough that only she could hear. "Yes," she said. Then quieter. "She's exactly what you said." "What did I say?" "On the island, when I asked what she was like." She looked at him. "You said she was the fixed point." He hadn't actually said those words, but she'd understood what he meant well enough to reconstruct them, which was its own kind of testimony. "Come have coffee," he said. She came. Zetadag. They stayed for 3 hours. It was the kind of morning that didn't announce itself as significant, but became so by accumulation, coffee and octopus facts, and Marcus quietly explaining to Emma how navigation worked on big ships, and Emma explaining back to him with complete confidence how sea turtles did it better using the Earth's magnetic field. Victoria sat at the kitchen counter and watched it all with the expression of someone who had walked into a room they'd been looking for without knowing they were looking for it. After Marcus took Emma to the backyard to look at something she'd insisted he needed to see a particular spot near the fence where she'd found what she believed was evidence of a fox, Victoria and Ethan were alone in the kitchen for the first time since the Thursday pancake night. "The thing I came to do in person," she said. "Yes." She reached into the bag she'd set on the counter and put a folder on the table between them. He looked at it, looked at her. "Open it," she said. He opened it. The top page was a proposal, not a legal document, not a contract. A proposal in the literal sense, a description of an idea and what it would take and what it could become. He read the title and then looked up at her. "The Walker Initiative," he said. She held his gaze. "I told you I had a project I'd been thinking about. I've been working on the structure for 3 weeks." She paused. "Emergency funds for working families in crisis. Stable housing grants for single-parent households. Retraining support for trade workers facing industry disruption. Administered by a board that includes people who've actually lived those circumstances, not just people who've studied them from above." She paused again. "Named after whoever I could convince to be its first public face." He was very still. "The name was Emma's suggestion," Victoria said. "She doesn't know that's what it is. She was just telling me on Thursday that her teacher said change usually needs a name before it can become real." A slight pause. "She's right about most things, your daughter." "You're not naming a foundation after me," he said. "I'm naming a foundation after the principle you represent," she said. "The person who does the work that holds everything else up, who nobody sees who the system is built on top of. That person deserves to be named." She met his eyes. "I'm asking your permission, not telling you. If you say no, I find another name." He looked at the folder, at the scope of what she'd built in 3 weeks, the financial structure, the distribution model, the board composition, the criteria for support. It was thorough in the way everything she did was thorough. But it was also something else, something underneath the structure and the planning. It was the answer to a question that no island conversation had formally asked, but that both of them had been circling since the first night about what you do when you've been given back your life with the knowledge of how it almost went. "It's real," he said. "Not a question. The first round of funding is already committed, $12 million. She said the number the way she said all large numbers, not for effect, just as information. "That's startup capital. The goal is to build it into something self-sustaining within 5 years." He set the folder down. "What do you need from me?" "Your name to start. Your story, if you're willing to tell it publicly, not the island, not us, just the work, the harbor, the 15 years. The single father who holds the marine industry together, one repair at a time, and still almost couldn't make rent." She held his gaze. "People need to see that face. Not mine. Mine is already known. Yours is the one that changes the story." He sat with that for a long moment. He thought about his father, who had put a wrench in his hand and said the world will take your tools, but it can't take your knowledge. He thought about Dale, who had said take the job on a morning that had changed everything. He thought about Mrs. Patterson, who had kept a porch light on for 8 days. He thought about all the people he knew who worked the way he worked, showing up, doing the thing, holding the line, and who nobody made a foundation about. "Yes," he said. She absorbed that. Her expression didn't change dramatically. This was not a person who celebrated things with excess, but something in her settled the way it had settled on the island when a problem moved from unknown to solvable. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me. It's the right thing to do." "It's..." She almost smiled. "That's what you said on the boat, when I asked why you came back for me." "Because it was the right thing to do," he confirmed. "I'm consistent. This time she did smile. The full version. He'd seen it in stages over the past weeks. The almost smile on the boat, the edge of one on the island, the surprised real version in the kitchen, and now it was complete, and it was. He thought one of the best things he'd seen a person do with their face. Emma came back inside 20 minutes later with Marcus behind her, and mud on her shoes, and a detailed theory about the fox that had apparently visited the yard, and the morning expanded back into noise and company. Ethan made sandwiches. Victoria helped without being asked which he noticed, and which Emma definitely noticed, because Emma noticed everything. At one point, Emma climbed up onto the counter beside Victoria, who was slicing something with the precise efficiency she brought to everything, and said, "Do you know how to do anything normal?" Victoria looked at her. Define normal. Like, do you know how to do laundry, or make your own coffee, or go to the grocery store without somebody doing it for you? "Emma," Ethan said. "It's a real question," Emma said. Victoria set the knife down. She thought about it with genuine seriousness. "I know how to do laundry," she said. "I lived alone for several years before the company got large enough that time became an issue. I make my own coffee at home. Grocery store." She considered. "That one I haven't done in approximately 4 years." Emma stared at her. 4 years. "There are services." "That's—" Emma appeared genuinely troubled by this. "You should come to the grocery store with us sometime." "Emma," Ethan said again. "It's a good idea," Emma insisted. "If you don't do normal things, you forget how they feel." She looked at Victoria with complete directness. "Mrs. Patterson says that rich people sometimes forget what regular life feels like, and then they make bad decisions because they're too far away from it." Victoria looked at the 9-year-old, who had just delivered what was in fact the most accurate critique of executive decision-making she'd heard in a decade, and said, "Mrs. Patterson is extremely correct." "I know," Emma said. "She's very smart." She picked up her sandwich. "So, you should come to the grocery store." Victoria looked at Ethan. He lifted both hands in a "this is your situation" gesture. She turned back to Emma. "Okay," she said. Emma nodded satisfied and took her sandwich to the table where Marcus was waiting to continue the conversation about sea navigation. Victoria turned back to the cutting board. "You know she's going to hold you to that," Ethan said quietly beside her. "I know," Victoria said. "I'm counting on it." The twist came the following Tuesday. Ethan was at the harbor below deck on a research vessel that had come in with a fouled prop shaft when his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. He almost let it go to voicemail. Then he answered. "Mr. Walker, my name is Sandra Cho. I'm a journalist with the National Tribune." A professional voice, measured competent. "I'm doing a piece on the Victoria Hayes situation, and I've been given your name as someone with direct knowledge of the events on the ship. I was wondering if you'd be willing to—" "No," he said. A brief pause. "Sir, I think you'd want to hear what I'm—" "Ms. Cho," he said. "I gave my statement to the federal investigators. That's the record. I'm not a public figure, and I intend to stay that way. If you have questions about the case, Victoria Hayes's attorney is the appropriate contact." He paused. "Have a good day." He hung up. He went back to the prop shaft. He finished the job. He drove home. That night, his phone rang again. Victoria. "A journalist called you?" she said. "Yes." "How did that go?" "I said no." A pause. "Just no. No explanation. No." "No," he said. "Was there something else I should have said?" Another pause. "Then, no. That was exactly right." She was quiet for a moment. "Ethan, someone gave her your name. Specifically, it wasn't public record, your name wasn't in any of the official releases. Someone with inside access is trying to pull you into the public narrative." He let that land. "Why? Because your story, The mechanic. The single father. The man who saved the CEO. That story, in the wrong framing, becomes about me owing you something. Becomes about the relationship between us in a way that someone can use to distract from the case, or complicate the foundation, or simply make things uncomfortable for both of us. Her voice was precise, measured, controlled. Someone is trying to make you a problem. Who? I don't know yet, but my security team is looking at it. A pause. I'm sorry. I didn't want the outside world to reach you. The outside world was always going to reach me, he said. I'm not that far outside it. You are actually, she said. You've built something very specific here, something insulated. She paused. I'm aware that I've been, she searched for the word, complicating that. Victoria. Yes. Do you think I can't handle a journalist calling me? No, she said immediately. I think you can handle anything. Then don't manage this. Tell me what you know. Let me know if there's something I need to do, and stop apologizing for existing in my life. The silence that followed was longer than usual. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. That was... She stopped. Most people who tell me to stop managing things are trying to limit my influence in a negotiation. I'm not in a negotiation with you. No, she said. You're not. She paused. That's still new for me. I know, he said. You're doing well with it. She made the sound that was adjacent to a laugh. You can't evaluate how I'm doing with it. I can actually, he said. You called me to tell me about the journalist instead of just having your team handle it without telling me. That's new behavior. That's you treating me like a person in the situation instead of a variable to be managed. A long pause. Then very quietly, I'm trying. I know you are. It doesn't come naturally. Most good things don't, he said. The foundation launched publicly 6 weeks later. Ethan found out the exact time it went live because Emma came running into the kitchen at 7:45 in the morning, holding her school tablet and saying with a volume disproportionate to the hour, Dad, you're on the internet. He was making coffee. He took the tablet. He looked at the page. The Walker Initiative. The landing page was clean and direct. No excess, no performance, which he recognized as Victoria's aesthetic applied to something she cared about deeply. There was text about the mission. There were numbers about the initial funding. There was a quote attributed to him that Victoria had sent him 3 days ago to approve and that he'd read 4 times before confirming something about the people who keep things running, being the people a functional society most depends on and least recognizes. And there was a photograph, not of him alone, not the kind of photograph a foundation usually used. It was a photograph taken apparently on the Saturday morning 3 weeks ago when Victoria and Marcus had come to the house. He didn't know anyone had taken it. He couldn't have said who had. But it was him and Emma at the kitchen counter, her leaning into his arm, both of them looking at something off camera, probably the octopus book, probably Marcus explaining something, and it was the most ordinary photograph imaginable. He stared at it. His phone rang. Victoria. You approved the photo, she said without preamble. I didn't know about the photo. Emma took it, she said. She texted it to me 2 weeks ago. She said... He heard something in her voice, a warmth she wasn't working to hide anymore. She said she thought it was the right one, because it looked like what it actually was. He looked at the photograph, at his daughter leaning into him, at the expression on his own face, relaxed, present exactly where he was. She's right, he said. She usually is, Victoria said. Her mother must have been remarkable. He was quiet for a moment. She was, he said. She would have laughed at all of this. In a good way, in the best way, he said. She had this laugh that meant I knew the world was stranger than you thought. She used it often. He paused. She would have liked you. The pause on Victoria's end was the kind that held something large and handled it carefully. That means... She stopped. Started again. Thank you. That means a great deal. Emma tugged his sleeve. Is that her? Tell her the website is good, but the font on the mission statement could be bigger. Emma says the font on the mission statement could be bigger, Ethan said. The font was a deliberate choice, Victoria said. She says it was deliberate. Emma took the phone. Deliberate doesn't mean right, she said into it with complete confidence. Then she handed the phone back and went to eat her cereal. On the other end of the line, Victoria was laughing. 3 months after the island on a Sunday in October, Victoria Hayes drove herself to the grocery store. She texted Ethan before she went Emma's assignment. Reporting for duty. He texted back, "Cereal aisle is overwhelming. Start with produce." She texted, "I have a system." He texted, "You always have a system." She texted 20 minutes later, "There are 17 varieties of apple. This is excessive." He texted Honeycrisp, "Don't overthink it." She texted 30 minutes after that, "Done. I bought Honeycrisps and something called a Meyer lemon because it looked interesting. Also, I may have spent $40 on cheese." He put his phone down and laughed in the empty kitchen on a Sunday morning and didn't try to stop it or make it smaller than it was. She texted one more time 2 minutes later. It was different from the rest. He read it twice. "I want to tell you something. Not over text. Next time I see you." He typed back, "Okay." She typed, "It might change things." He sat with that for a moment. Thought about a woman who had spent her life managing outcomes and was now apparently willing to say something that had an uncertain result. Thought about what it cost her to be willing to do that. Thought about 8 days and 3 months and a photo on a foundation website of 2 people who didn't know they were being photographed. He typed, "Some changes are the right kind." The 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Then, "I'm starting to believe that." He set his phone down on the kitchen counter. Outside, the morning was doing what October mornings did on the coast, coming in clear and cold, and direct the kind of light that didn't apologize for what it showed. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway in her Saturday sweatshirt, hair half braided, one sock on, and one off, already holding the octopus book, even though she'd read it twice. "Is Victoria coming this week?" she asked. "I think so," he said. Emma absorbed that. "Good," she said with the matter-of-fact certainty she applied to things she'd already decided were settled. "She needs more regular life." She sat down at the table. "Also, I want to tell her about the anglerfish thing. The bioluminescence is actually more complicated than the book says." "I'll let her know to prepare," Ethan said. "And make pancakes," Emma said. "She needs to make them herself this time, not just pour the batter." "Okay." "And tell her Honeycrisp is the right answer, so she knows she did it right." He looked at his daughter, sitting in the October light with her lopsided braid and her one sock and her book about creatures that made their own light in the deepest dark, as if she'd always known that was possible, as if she'd never doubted for a moment that the dark was worth going into if you had something to carry through it. "Yeah," he said. "I'll tell her." He picked up his coffee. He stood at the counter in his own kitchen in his own life, which was the same life it had been 4 months ago in all the external measurements. Same harbor, same truck, same coastal town, same peanut butter pancakes on Saturday, and was not the same life at all in the ways that didn't show up in external measurements. He thought about a storm that had tried to end things, and a beacon that had said otherwise, and a woman who had walked into his kitchen and held kindling like it owed her money, and said, "Show me," and meant it. He thought about the shape of things that didn't have a name at first, about how you built something from nothing, which he'd always known how to do, and how the something turned out bigger than what you'd planned when you started, which was the best kind of surprise. He had gone out on a job on a Tuesday morning to fix an engine. He had come home with something entirely different, not instead of his life, inside it, added to it. The way a second room doesn't replace the first, it just means the house is larger than you thought, and there's more to come home to, and the word home means something richer than it did before. Emma turned a page. The morning light moved on the table. Outside, the ocean did what the ocean always did, enormous and patient and absolutely certain of its own direction, indifferent to the small human dramas it witnessed, and occasionally, when it had something to say, created. Ethan Walker was home. He had always been home. He was just finally beginning to understand the full size of it.